Imagine the moment your heart stops. Everything you've ever known slips away, and the world you leave behind freezes in a single, shattering breath. What happens next? Not years later, not at the end of time, but right then, in the heartbeat after life fades. Few dare to ask, fewer still know the answer. But for Elias, a quiet carpenter from a sleepy hill town, that moment isn't a mystery, it's a story waiting to unfold. At 62, he's a man of rough hands and steady faith, a husband, a father, a neighbor whose life seems ordinary until a Tuesday dusk changes everything. A mug of tea slips, a cry pierces the air, and suddenly Elias steps beyond the veil, not into darkness, but into a journey so vivid it rewrites everything he thought he knew. This isn't a tale of endings. It's a gripping adventure of beginnings, woven with ancient truths and whispered promises. Over 7 days, Elias will face the unknown, meet the divine, and discover a reality that turns death into a doorway. Stay with me through every twist, every revelation, because this isn't just his story. It's a glimpse of what waits for us all. Elias wasn't the kind of man who chased attention. He was a carpenter with a heart as steady as the oak he carved, living quietly in a little town hugged by rolling hills. At 62, his hands told stories of a lifetime, rough from years of sanding wood, scarred from splinters in his shed out back, yet gentle when they held his family close. That Tuesday evening felt like any other. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in strokes of gold, and Elias settled onto his creaky porch chair, a chipped mug of tea steaming in his grip. He'd spent the day tinkering with a neighbor's wobbly chair, a small favor that left him with a quiet grin. Inside, Miriam, his wife of 38 years, hummed an old hymn. Amazing grace, her voice threading through the open window like a lifeline to his soul. He sipped the tea, savoring the warmth against the evening chill, when a jolt hit him. A pain so fierce it clawed at his chest, not a whisper of age, but a roar that snatched his breath away. The mug slipped, shattering on the weathered boards with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. Elias clutched his shirt, gasping, his vision swimming as Miriam's voice broke through. "Elias!" She burst out, her scream raw and desperate, dropping beside him as neighbors spilled from their homes, drawn by the sound. He reached for her, wanting to say it was okay, to feel her hand one more time. But the world tilted, shadows rushed in, and his heart thumped once, twice, then stopped cold. To Miriam, sobbing over his still form, and the neighbors murmuring prayers, it was as if the earth itself had cracked open, a good man stolen in a blink. But for Elias, the silence wasn't the end. It was a doorway. A vibrant hum filled the void, not empty but electric, tingling with a presence he couldn't pin down. He didn't linger over his body, didn't drift like a lost spirit from some fireside tale. Instead, a lightness surged through him. The ache in his joints, the heaviness of years, peeled away like old paint under a summer sun. He wasn't floating aimlessly. A pull, soft yet fierce, tugged him forward, like a voice whispering his name from the other side. The Bible he'd pored over, its pages dog-eared from late-night readings, flared in his mind. Ecclesiastes 12:7. The dust returns to the ground, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Those words, once a comfort in the pews, now burst into reality, unfolding in the heartbeat after his last. His body, the shell that had laughed with Miriam, cradled his newborns, sweated through long days, lay still, crumbling back to the dirt it came from. But his spirit, that spark God breathed into him decades ago, didn't flicker out. It leaped, awake and wild, racing toward its creator. Pain dissolved, fear evaporated, the weight of life sloughed off, and Elias saw, really saw, with eyes no longer clouded by flesh, sharp and alive like never before. This wasn't the grim finale folks whispered about, a curtain falling, a flame snuffed out. No, it was a launch, dazzling and bold, brighter than any sunrise he'd ever chased over those hills. He thought of Jesus on the cross, crying, "My Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Luke 23:46. Not just a story, but a roadmap, a soul breaking free to the Father. Then the parable of the rich man and Lazarus hit him, both men dying, both awake, one in comfort, one in torment. No long sleep, just vivid awareness. and Elias felt it thrumming through him, alive in every fiber of his being. He wasn't hovering, watching Miriam's tears stain the porch or hearing the neighbors' hushed pleas. His soul surged forward, swift and certain because the unseen world didn't wait. Scripture didn't promise a nap until some distant dawn. It promised this, a leap into eternity, bold and immediate. For Elias, who'd pinned his life to Christ's cross, this moment was holy. Earth's chains snapped, joy rushing in like a flood. He wasn't alone. A presence shadowed him, guiding him through a realm he'd only glimpsed in faded ink. The town, the porch, the broken mug blurred, not gone, but faint against the roaring tale spinning out ahead. Miriam's cries softened, overtaken by a sound, a murmur, a melody, a summons. The first day ignited, not as a fade to black, but as a heart-pounding plunge into forever. And Elias stepped in, alive with wonder at the marvels waiting just beyond. Elias wasn't the kind of man who chased attention. He was a carpenter, plain and steady, living in a small town hugged by rolling hills where the air carried whispers of pine and earth. At 62, his hands told stories of decades spent coaxing life from wood, knuckles gnarled, fingers scarred from years in his shed out back. That Tuesday evening felt like any other. The sun dipped low, spilling gold across the sky, and Elias settled onto his porch, a chipped mug of tea steaming in his grip. He'd spent the day patching up a neighbor's rickety chair, a small favor that barely registered, but it left a quiet grin tugging at his mouth. Inside, Miriam, his wife of 38 years, hummed an old hymn, her voice floating through the open window like a thread of light weaving through dusk. He sipped his tea, savoring the warmth, when a jolt ripped through his chest, sharp, brutal, not the dull nag of age, but a claw sinking deep, snatching the air from his lungs. The mug slipped, shattering on the weathered boards with a crack that split the evening's peace. Elias gasped, clutching his shirt, his vision swimming as Miriam's footsteps pounded closer. "Elias!" she screamed, her voice breaking like glass as she dropped beside him, hands trembling, tears spilling fast. He wanted to reach for her, to whisper it'd be okay, but the world tilted, shadows swallowing the light. His heart thudded once, twice, then stopped, a final fading beat. To Miriam, to the neighbors rushing over with wide eyes and hushed prayers, it was as if the universe held its breath, a good man gone, stolen by a moment too swift to grasp. But for Elias, that wasn't the end. It was a door cracking open. A stillness rushed in, not cold or hollow, but alive, tingling with a presence he couldn't pin down. He didn't linger over his body sprawled there, didn't float like some lost spirit from a fireside tale. Instead, a lightness surged through him, the creak of his knees, the drag of tired years, all burned away like fog under a fierce noon sun. He wasn't drifting aimlessly. A pull, gentle yet fierce, tugged him onward, like a voice calling from a place he had always known but never seen. The Bible he'd pored over, its pages soft from years of touch, leaped alive in his mind. Ecclesiastes 12:7. The dust returns to the ground, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Well, once a verse he'd murmured in church, now it was happening, real as the breath he'd just lost. His body, worn from raising kids, burying parents, shaping wood through long summers, lay still, crumbling back to the dirt it came from. But his spirit, that spark God had breathed into him, didn't flicker out. It soared, awake, buzzing with life, racing toward the one who'd made him. Pain dissolved, fear evaporated. The weight of earth slipped off like an old coat, and Elias really saw for the first time with eyes unbound by flesh, sharp and free. This wasn't the end folks feared. A curtain falling, a candle snuffed. It was a dawn, bold and blazing, brighter than any morning he'd greeted. He thought of Jesus on the cross. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Luke 23:46. No metaphor, but a soul breaking free to its source. The rich man and Lazarus danced through his mind, both awake after death, one cradled, one cursed, no slumber in between. Elias felt it too, alive in every fiber of his being, not hovering over Miriam's chippons or the neighbors' murmurs, but moving, swift and sure because the unseen world didn't stall. Scripture didn't promise sleep, it promised this, a leap into eternity, instant and electric. For Elias, who'd bet his life on Christ's love, this moment glowed sacred. Earth's chains snapped, joy rushing in like a tide. He wasn't alone. A presence shadowed him, guiding through a realm he'd only glimpsed in holy words. The town, the porch, the shattered mug blurred. Not gone, but faint against the wild story spinning out ahead. Miriam's cries softened, overtaken by a sound. A whisper, a hum, a summons. The first day ignited, not a fade to black, but a thrilling plunge into forever. And Elias stepped into it, pulse racing with what might come next. That summons didn't fade, it swelled. And before Elias could brace himself, everything shifted, not a slow unraveling, but a jolt, like a dam bursting to flood the night. The space around him wasn't empty anymore. It pulsed, alive with a light that didn't just shine but peeled back shadows, paired with a sound that wasn't noise but a voice, deep and unshakable. Then he stood there, tall, radiant, a figure blazing with a glory Elias couldn't wrap his head around. His legs gave way, not from dread, but from an awe too vast to stand under. It was Jesus, not the soft-spoken carpenter he'd pictured sanding planks, but the King of Revelation 1, eyes like torches, voice like a roaring flood, face glowing like the sun unleashed. Yet in that fire, Elias recognized him, the one he'd called to over his workbench, the one he'd clung to when Miriam's womb emptied and grief clawed them raw. "Elias," he said, gentle as a whisper yet cutting through every wall, "welcome home." The words hit like a storm breaking, washing away every question that had haunted him. Why the child never breathed. Why his father's years were so few. Why faith sometimes felt like chasing wind. They melted in this glow, not explained but understood, swallowed by the one before him. Hebrews 9:27 flashed hot in his mind. People die once, then face judgment. He'd always imagined a far-off throne, but this was here now, a raw, soul-bearing moment, not with trumpets, but with truth. No judge's gavel, just a mirror held up. Had he chosen Christ? Had he lived in his mercy? Elias didn't need to plead. The peace roaring through him roared back yes. At 30, he'd collapsed by his bed, undone by the cross's weight, and every faltering step since had been caught in that grace. This wasn't a prize he'd won. It was a gift, etched in blood not his own. But he knew this wasn't every soul's story. Luke 16 surged up, the rich man writhing, Lazarus resting, both wide-eyed after death. For Elias, it was a dream crashing into flesh. Jesus, right there, the one who'd shadowed him through lean winters and broken dreams. No more prayers through shows, no more guessing if he heard. The gap was gone, filled with a closeness that burned. Wounds sealed shut in that look, every scrap of trust repaid with a presence that hummed alive. It wasn't just a rush of heart, it was an unveiling. His life spilled out like a tapestry unrolled. The time he mended a stranger's cart, the prayers he breathed over his sleeping kids, all stitching a pattern he'd missed, now blazing clear. But he felt the other side too. Those who'd spurned this love met not warmth, but a shattering ache. Not because God shut them out, but because they'd locked him away. Jesus' smile flickered with promise, the light easing as if teasing what lay ahead. Others moved nearby, unseen but close, their steps echoing purpose. The first day still burned, and eternity yawned wide, dragging Elias into its blazing core. He didn't linger on the porch scene anymore. Miriam's face, the neighbors' hushed voices, they slipped behind this new reality, vivid and fierce. He'd read of this king, sung of him in cracked pews, but now he stood here real as stone, tender as dawn. Every sermon he'd half heard snapped into focus. Judgment wasn't a distant threat. It was this, a heartbeat after death, stripping all but the heart's truth. For Elias, it was homecoming. Every tear he'd shed, every quiet yes to Christ, now crowned with this face, this voice. He could have stayed there forever, locked in that gaze. But the air stirred again, hinting at more. The light didn't dim, it beckoned, and Elias felt lifted, not by his own will, but by something or someone ready to carry him deeper into the wild unknown, stretching out ahead. That sweep came fast. The glow of Jesus' face still hung in Elias' soul like a lantern's afterimage when a new touch jolted him. Hands, strong as iron, yet soft as a mother's, lifting him like he was something precious pulled from the deep. He twisted, and there they were, two angels, massive, their forms shimmering like light caught in a prism, wings not feathers but flames coiling in silent grace. Their eyes danced with a acuity that pierced him, as if they'd been waiting, watching him all along. Luke 16:22 thundered through his mind. The angels carried him to Abraham's side. No dusty tale from a pulpit. This was now alive in the echo of his last breath. They weren't here to let him wander some misty void. They'd come to lead him home, their presence a vow etched in glory. Fear didn't dare creep in, only wonder, like he'd stumbled into a parade meant just for him. They didn't speak, but their quiet wrapped him tight, a shared thrill pulsing between them. Hebrews 1:14 sparked alive. Angels, spirits sent to serve those who inherit salvation. That was Elias. And these watchers, who'd hovered through the storm that spared his shed, who'd guarded his son's fevered nights, now bore him up, their mission flaring bright as noon. The path wasn't a mad dash. It unfolded slow and grand, like a king's guard ushering a long-lost son. Elias caught flickers elsewhere, dark, fleeting, and knew not every soul rode this wind. The rich man had no guides, just a plunge into despair. For Elias it was a gift, a celestial escort murmuring, "You're expected, and we're here." The world bent, not land or sky, but a tapestry of the beyond, stitched with a promise he could feel. A destination loomed, not a guess, but a tug, solid as a rope pulling him in. This wasn't a stumble into shadows. It was a song, a rise on wings that had cradled creation itself. He'd read of them, telling Mary her miracle, shielding Daniel from lions. And now they wove him into their endless tale. No rush marred their glide. It was calm, sure, like heaven had flung open its gates and said, "Come." The first day raged on, and Elias saw it stark. Death wasn't a drop, it was a climb, held by hands that knew his every step. Where to? He didn't fret, just marveled, trusting the glow they followed. The town, Miriam's voice, the porch's creak, they drifted back, overtaken by a light ahead, warm and fierce. He'd always pictured angels as distant, golden figures in stained glass, but these were real, muscle and fire, grace and might, carrying him like a brother reclaimed. Every near miss of his life replayed, the flood that stopped short, the fever that broke. Had they been there, unseen, steering him to this? Now they didn't hide. They shone, their silence a hymn he felt in his bones. The air thickened, not with weight but with wonder, as they moved through a realm that defied his old eyes. Colors he couldn't name, a hum that wasn't sound but life itself. He didn't look back. The past was a shadow to this blaze. His heart, or what had been his heart, leaped, not with fear, but with a hunger to see where these hands led. They weren't just guides, they were proof. God didn't leave him to fall, but sent his own to lift him high. The journey sang of purpose, every step or sweep, a note in a melody older than time, and Elias wrote it, caught in a thrill that promised more than he'd ever dared dream. That song hit a pause as the angels eased their pace, and a stillness gripped Elias, not dull but charged, like the hush before a thunderclap splits the sky. Ahead lay two realms, close enough to brush his soul, yet torn apart by a gulf wider than any sea he'd ever pictured. To his right shimmered a light, warm and alive, tugging him with a peace that felt like home, paradise he knew in his gut. To his left loomed a darkness, heavy with a sorrow that whispered without words. Hades. Luke 16 crashed in, Lazarus nestled in comfort, the rich man begging in flames. This was the great divide, and Elias teetered on its edge, not picking a side, but landing where his life had aimed him. The angels tipped him toward the light, their wings ringing soft like bells on a breeze. And as he crossed, a calm roared through him, wild and deep, like stepping into a house built just for him. He wasn't alone. Figures flickered ahead, faint but familiar, maybe Abraham or souls who'd walked this road. The air thrummed with a voice so quiet it roared, a tune without notes that cradled him close. This was where Jesus landed after the cross, telling the thief, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." Luke 23:43. Not the final golden city, but a rest stop glowing with promise. Elias was alive. Miriam's laugh, his son's grip, the tang of sawdust, all sharper than memory, real as if he'd just left them. But across that chasm he felt the flip, unseen but pressing, agony, regret, a cry unanswered. The rich man's voice haunted, water, a plea for his kin, awakened torment. Both sides lived, breathed, knew, but worlds apart. Elias saw it clear. The gulf was locked, uncrossable. Luke 16:26. Sealed not here, but back in the life he'd run, in the night he'd knelt and said yes to Christ. The angels stepped back, their task done, and Elias stood in paradise. Days flowing not in hours, but in a peace that grew roots. No floating, no fading. He was here, soaked in a nearness to God he couldn't measure. Hades waited beyond, not the last blaze, but a grim hold for judgment's dawn. No second shots, just the truth. His choice for Jesus had carved this path. For him, it was light, a truing that swelled like a tide. The divide didn't scare. It sang of mercy, of a love that pulled him here. He'd always thought death split you off, but this was connection, vivid, pulsing, a place where every moment of his life found its echo. The air didn't weigh him down. It lifted, laced with a scent he couldn't name. Freedom, maybe, or grace. He didn't miss the porch or the shed, not yet, because this was bigger, a home that fit every longing he'd ever buried. The shadows of Hades didn't touch him. They only sharpened the wonder of where he stood. Days, or what felt like days, rolled by, not ticking but blooming, each one sinking him deeper into this light. He'd read of heaven, sung of it, but this was Rovar, a taste, a promise, a bridge to something even wilder. The angels lingered, their glow a steady heartbeat, and Elias felt it. He wasn't just resting, he was waiting, poised for a glory that hadn't fully unfurled. Every sermon on eternity clicked now. This wasn't vague hope, it was real, solid, a land where his soul took root. The divide was a line drawn in life's sand, and he'd crossed it right, not by his strength, but by a hand that never let go. That hum grew as Elias hit what felt like the seventh day, not clocked by sun or stars, but by a fullness, swelling like a river ready to spill. Paradise wasn't a still pond. It rippled, and his senses sharpened. Not foggy, but clear, like a fog lifting to show a mountain's peak. Revelation 6:9-10 thumped in him. Martyrs under the altar, shouting, "How long, Lord?" He felt their thread to earth. Miriam by their bed, tears falling but voice rising in song. Jacob teaching his boy to pray. Anna setting daisies on his grave. His life, those workbench pleas, those quiet helps, still danced, waves crashing far beyond his old horizons. Jesus stood near, not a vision now but a friend, his light a flame that warmed without scorching. Elias joined a roar, Revelation 5's hymn to the Lamb, his voice unbound, weaving with a throng that shook the air. But a spark flared, his body, cold in the town's dirt, waited. 1 Thessalonians 4:16 blazed, the dead in Christ will rise first. This wasn't the finish, a pause, a breath before the horn, when he'd stand whole, flesh and soul fused in glory. Hebrews 12's witnesses flickered. Were they cheering him, rooting for Miriam? Death wasn't a slash, it was a bridge, stretching to a dawn he could taste. Below, Miriam sat where he'd fallen, the mug shards gone, silence thick as wool. Psalm 34:18 wrapped her. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. She cried. Jesus wept too, even knowing life would win, because loss cut deep and she felt him near. Elias wasn't lost. He was held, and she'd see him again, clasp him, sing with him. Paul's words in 1 Thessalonians 4:13 steadied her. Grieve, but not without hope. Her tears fell, but light broke through. The empty chair hurt, but it promised reunion. His death shook her awake. Love now, forgive quick, chase what lasts. His prayers still hovered, his faith a torch in their kids' hands. For Elias, those 7 days weren't a fade. They were a launch. Meeting Christ, riding angels' wings, crossing the divide. now blooming into forever. He'd stepped from dusk to dawn, not a flicker but a fire, burning with worship and waiting. Death wasn't a wall, it was a gate, swung wide, and he stood on his far side, poised for the next wild leap. The air in paradise didn't sit still, it sang, a melody of rest and readiness, every note tying him to a story that didn't end. He saw it now, every splinter he'd sanded, every tear he'd shed, every yes to Jesus weaving into this. The town felt small, a dot against this vastness, but Miriam's strength grew there, fed by a hope he'd left her. He didn't miss the shed or the hills, not yet, because this was fuller, a home that held every piece of him. The divide had split fates, but his landed here, not by luck, but by a love that chased him down. Days, or their echo, rolled on, not fading but building, a crescendo he couldn't chart. He'd sung of heaven in cracked pews, but this was alive, raw, real, a place where his soul sank roots and reached for more. The angel's glow pulsed nearby, steady as a heartbeat, and Elias felt it. This wasn't just peace, it was promise, a beginning that stretched past time's edge. He didn't fear what came next. He craved it. Every sermon on eternity, now a shout in his bones. Death had flung him here, not to sleep, but to wake, to worship, to wait for the day Christ's voice would call him whole.